Hello, I'm Michael Tressler, a Senior Customer Engineer with Microsoft, and welcome to Teams Rooms Foundations Training, Module 6. In this module, we'll talk about managing Teams Rooms, and it's the first of two modules.
In this module, we'll learn about the available management options for Teams Rooms. You'll get a better understanding of which tools to use at which time, and you'll learn how to monitor your Teams Rooms environment. Also note that in this module, we're going to be focusing mostly on managing the Teams Rooms application itself, and in the next module, we're going to spend more time on managing Windows. So the easiest way to manage Teams Rooms is to basically let it manage itself, so unmanaged. All Windows updates and application updates come directly from Microsoft, so the Teams Rooms compute module would need to have access to Microsoft updates. And then you would just simply use a local administrator account when necessary to sign into the machine and perform some kind of maintenance or updates. In a strictly on-premises environment, on-premises management tools are certainly there for you to use. You can use Active Directory, Exchange, Skype for Business, Configuration Manager, XML configuration file, which we'll get into in a moment, and PowerShell. And then there are other tools you could use, such as Operations Manager as well, to track CPU, RAM, and maybe get some alerts on events. If you're in a hybrid environment, so partially on premises, partially with Microsoft 365, you could use all of these tools, whichever ones are most appropriate for you. So Teams Admin Center. This will let you monitor and manage your Teams rooms within the Teams Admin Center. You can use Skype for Business tools, Azure Active Directory Sync to sync from local Active Directory up to Microsoft 365. With Microsoft 365, there are some things you can do with Intune with Teams Rooms. And then a lot of the similar things we've already come across with Exchange, PowerShell, XML, and Configuration Manager. Now, if you're in a pure cloud environment, and keep in mind, you could be in a hybrid environment, but treat your Teams Rooms strictly as cloud-enabled devices. So they would only use Azure AD and really not know about on-premises except for maybe Skype for Business if you're connect to that. But if you are in a Teams or Skype for Business only or both, so if you're in a cloud-based unified communications configuration, even if you have on-premises Active Directory, you may be best served to just have Teams Rooms strictly within Microsoft 365 management. And so, as we've already mentioned, are available for managing a strictly cloud-connected Teams Rooms. And then finally, we have an offering as well, Microsoft Teams Rooms Premium. This is a 24/7 by 365 monitoring and alerting solution where there's a dedicated operations center that will manage and monitor your Teams Rooms for you. So they can do things like reset USB, they can push down patches. If necessary, someone can be dispatched to go on site to address on-site issues, such as a bad HDMI cable or a camera that got unplugged. So that is another option you have for managing Teams Rooms.
This also includes the Microsoft Teams Rooms Standard License.
So what is PowerShell? PowerShell is a command line interface, which lets you manage not just Windows, but almost every Microsoft server as well. Windows PowerShell enables the ability to create scripts to easily automate many things. And in a previous module, we discussed automating the creation of resource accounts. Now within Teams Rooms, there isn't much you can do with PowerShell, as the Teams Rooms app does not provide an interface into PowerShell. However, you can do things like get the attached devices, get the app status, retrieve logs, and things like that using PowerShell. If you want to use PowerShell with Teams Rooms, you'll have to enable remote PowerShell. And so here we have the PowerShell command enable-ps remoting -force. And once it's been enabled, you can then run commands against your Teams Rooms. Here's the output of one such command, or it's a collection of commands, and all of the PowerShell that generates the output that you're seeing is available on docs.microsoft.com in the Teams Rooms section. So I won't be showing the PowerShell because there's actually quite a bit to it. So the idea here is for you to get an understanding of what you can see by using PowerShell. So here we can see the application status. One thing to point out, as was mentioned earlier, Teams Rooms reboots at about 2:30 every morning. And so we can see that the start time on this Teams Rooms was at 2:33 a.m. So it went down at 2:30, came back up. This is an unmanaged workstation since it's not in a domain or in a work group. So that's the kind of information we can pull from the system. In lieu of PowerShell, the Skype settings XML file is a file that really lets you manage the settings of Teams Rooms. The XML file has a bunch of settings that you can set, and essentially everything that you can see on the console settings interface can be set via the XML file. Here's an example of the XML file, and again, this comes directly from docs.microsoft.com. So search for the Teams Rooms section. So notice there are a lot of the settings that we can set on the console directly, like enabling proximity join, enable Skype mode or Teams mode, is a dual screen. We've talked about logs already, so many of those things. And down here we can see custom theme, the custom theme image, so this lets you change the background on the front of room displays. And we'll give a demonstration of that later in this module. The Skype settings XML file must be copied to a specific directory. Now you can copy it manually, or you can use group policy or a PowerShell script to copy the XML file out to one or many Teams Rooms devices. Once it's been copied to the machine, the file is not read until the next reboot. Upon reboot, the XML file gets read and then deleted, and the settings that are in the file are then applied. One of the most requested features is the ability to have your own custom background on the front of room displays in Teams Rooms, and that is handled by the Skype settings XML file. There are some requirements for the image, so it must be exactly 3840 by 1080, and a few specific file types as well. Again, on docs.microsoft.com in the Teams Rooms area, there's a custom Photoshop template that you can use to start designing your own custom backdrops. This is an example of the template where it has two different backgrounds available for you to use, showing different things. So at the forefront in maroon color, we can see a pretty simple with just the time and the conference room information. The image in the back in the blue, if you look at that a little more closely, especially in the bottom right of the blue, you can see there are instructions for end users directly on the background image. So not only can you customize it to your company look and feel by having company logos on the front of room displays, you can even provide end user support. Here is the relevant section of the Skype settings.xml file. You only need this subset of the XML file in order to set a custom theme. I do want to point out that the red component, green component, and blue component settings are old and are no longer used. So you can put any value here, but they will be ignored. However, it is still necessary to put this section into the Skype setting XML file. So when changing the theme, you'll copy the wallpaper file and the Skype settings XML file into that directory that we saw earlier for Skype settings XML. Restart the device, and then your front of room displays will show the new backdrop. Here's the sample template file which you can download from Microsoft Docs website. I wanted to walk through this file really quickly to point out what this template offers you. So certainly it offers some instructions, and then we can go through the different layers and start turning off layers and removing the Microsoft instruction sections like that and get to the actual backdrop. So here's what a backdrop would look like, and this is the one we saw in the previous slide. If you note, it's on a layer called Best, and this is a nice layer because it has contrast between the white text, which is the default color, and the background. And it's not very busy and it's easy to read. There are examples of good. Up here you can see some of the white text is a little light to read, which is why it's not best, but it is still a good image. OK images, again, it's a light background, white text. So up here would be the name of the room and the telephone number for the room if it has one. So that's why this only gets an OK. Again, the white line, there's a logo over where the name of the room would be. So that is why it's only an OK choice. And then maybe, just because it's pretty busy. But you know, it's okay. We could maybe use this as our backdrop. And then we get into the bad ones, where there's just so much text that it becomes difficult for people to read and understand what's going to happen. There's a logo over where the name of the room would be located. Here, again, a lot of text, solid line, difficult to read. So too much instruction is going on here. And then we get into this, which is just a complete nightmare. So I did just want to point out that this template file, the sample file, does have a lot of different examples of what's good and bad, and then sort of has these markers within the document to tell you where text and time would appear. And I guess I should have left the time on as we look down at some of these other images. So I'll turn that off and get to maybe bad 3. Yeah, see, we have the time now. We have instructions and the time conflicting. So that's why that one is a bad one. The newest addition to managing Teams rooms is Microsoft Teams Admin Center. Within the Teams Admin Center, you can now see an inventory of all of your devices and their status, as well as drill into performance statistics, be able to change configuration settings without having to use a Skype settings.xml file. So as we move forward, Skype settings.xml will be superseded by making changes via Teams Admin Center. Here's a view of what the Teams Admin Center looks like. We can see all of the devices are listed on the left-hand column. We can also see quickly that there's one unhealthy device and there's one that is offline. We can see this healthy meetings and meetings that have issues. So 99% of our meetings are good. 1% had some kind of issue, as well as the usage. From here, we can click directly on these to drill into more information. So in this slide, we have drilled into one of these devices. So we can see easily we can download device logs, remotely restart the device, or refresh the details if we think that the values in Admin Center are not current. We see the status, see device name, see quality over the last 7 days and how many meetings and calls have happened in that room. We can get software version information. We can see actions that have been taken by Teams Admin Center onto the Teams Rooms device. In this example, we remotely rebooted the device, and here we went and downloaded the logs. We can see every call and every meeting that has happened in that room. As you can see here, this is the replacement for Skype settings.xml. So in this dropdown, we could change the default mode from, say, Skype for Business only to Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams as default. Note again, Bluetooth advertisement and other settings are available. So this will end up replacing Skype settings.xml. You can also use this to troubleshoot a poor audio call. So there was a meeting and you got feedback that an attendee had a poor experience in a Teams Rooms meeting. So you want to drill down and see what the cause is. So you can go to the Activity tab of the room that they were using, and we can see down here the audio quality, there was a poor value in the audio quality. So we can then click on this date and time, and that will get us to the information of that meeting. So now we see the different sessions within this meeting, and we can see that one of them was poor while all the rest of the attendees in the meeting had a good experience. So we can click on this specific date and time to get more information. Now we have the information of just that attendee. We can immediately see that the poor call was caused by the network. So we can click on the network icon to see what the network had to say. Here we can see that the average round trip time was 784 milliseconds and the maximum round trip time was almost 2 seconds. We lost almost 55% of all of our packets. This is well below our preferred metrics. You can look at docs.microsoft.com, and there are articles listing the requirements for latency, packet loss, and jitter. And just through my experience, I know that these values are exorbitantly high. Is there anything we can do to determine why the network stream was this poor? So we click on the system icon to learn more about what system was the end user using. We can see that it was Android 9 and on a Samsung phone. We can presume that the attendee was either traveling and driving through tunnels or parking garages, or took the call and hopped on an elevator, or was just in a poor coverage area. So it seems likely that the issue was not with Teams Rooms or with our network, but with a remote attendee and their device. Certainly you could reach out to the attendee and ask where they were to validate the issue. Azure Monitor is essentially a large database which collects log information, and then you set rules. And based on those rules, it'll parse the logs and take an action, such as sending you an email. Here's a functional overview of what happens. On each Teams Rooms device, you would install the Azure Monitor agent. When that's done, it'll start collecting the data from the Windows event log and pushing it up to the cloud-based Azure Monitor storage. And you can do this on as many Teams Rooms devices as you would like. The log analytics will parse the JSON payload, and based on rules we have defined, it can take an action. In order to use Azure Monitor, you need a valid Azure subscription. You need to set up the custom fields on how to define what event entries are important and which ones are not, and what action to take on specific events. For example, on docs.microsoft.com in the Teams Rooms section, there's detailed documentation on how to configure Azure Monitor to send emails in the event of a hardware disconnect. Here's an example email from Microsoft Azure telling us that there was an application issue. And then we can go through the body of the meeting to determine on which device and potentially what the actual application issue was. This is a view of the event log entries that are used in Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams application writes these event log entries into the event viewer log. These are all available on docs.microsoft.com in the Teams Rooms section. So I'm going to move along and show you that these are the important ones. So when setting up Azure Monitor or even Operations Manager or any other log management software, these are the events that you are looking for that will let you know that there's been an error or the app has restarted. So in this module, we reviewed the available management options for Teams Rooms, so unmanaged, managed, hybrid, cloud only, Microsoft Managed Rooms service. You'll learn when to use each management tool and what each one does. So PowerShell is good for collecting data. Teams Admin Center is the next step in management for Teams Rooms. And then learn how to monitor your Teams Rooms environment using Azure Monitor or by using your own tools to parse event log entries.